What's up, guys? We should be live. I see there's a few people in the chat already. That's awesome. Several people here live. 12. That's good. Probably have some more people coming in soon. If you can see and hear me, please let me know. If there's any issues with the audio or video, please let me know that as well. And good to see you guys. Teresa, this has got to be Haku, right? Good seeing you, Haku. Cool. So yeah, we have a special guest today. It's Dr. Henry Lim. I'll be bringing him on just shortly here, and we'll be talking about the water margin, aka Outlaws of the Marsh, aka All Men Are Brothers. There's several different titles that it's been published under. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dr. Lim's background, how he got into water margin specifically, but Chinese literature and culture and whatnot, and some of his experience as a teacher and researcher. Audio, video, fine. Okay, cool. Thanks, Peter. Scott, good seeing you. Hope you're doing your reps. Scott's in our vowels challenge right now. So, okay, so yeah, shortly I'm going to bring Dr. Lim on and we'll talk about that. But I just want to talk a little bit about the course. It's going to be a really interesting course. This is, as I've said in some of the emails, it's one of the best known and most beloved novels in Chinese history. And it's one of these stories that even if people haven't read the original novel themselves, most native speakers know the novel. You know, they've seen TV adaptations or they know it through cultural references and things. It's a massive part of Chinese culture. And it's one of those things that as a non-native learner, or I would imagine, and Dr. Lim can talk about this, but even as a heritage learner, you get a little street cred for knowing this stuff. And it's one of those like, this is not from the novel, but I made a reference to Hong Men Yen, which is like something from the Three Kingdoms period. And people just were, super impressed that I would know such a thing. So yeah, it's really crucial cultural knowledge for those of you learning Chinese, and and I think Dr. Lim will be able to do a bit better job talking about it than I can. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him on. Let's see. There we go. Welcome.
Hello, John. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today.
Yep. Glad you're here, man. Josh, good seeing you, man. Yeah, so we will have, just so everyone knows, there's something about this streaming format where I think we're just not set up professionally enough. And so Dr. Lim's video is going to be a little bit blurry, but the slides will be nice and clear when they come through. So don't worry about that. So can you tell us a bit about yourself, how you got into, learning Chinese and how you got into water margin specifically and all that?
Sure. So, I was in college in 2005. Well, I'm giving away my age now. Well, I was in college in 2005, and I had to take a foreign language requirement. And, growing up speaking Cantonese, but then forgetting it in middle school and high school, I just thought, hey, it'd be a good way to sort of get back to my roots because as an Asian American, for me, that's something that was really important. And so I took a first year Chinese class with my professor, Dr. Pease. He's a Song Dynasty specialist. And the last semester I had with him, he introduced us to some Tang poetry. And I just fell in love with it. There was this line, 此地一为别，孤蓬万里征. And that image of, friends separating from each other in the Tang and tumbleweed tumbling, and just rolling 10,000 miles just really moved me. So I decided at that moment, I'm going to major in Chinese. As I was getting geared up for grad school, I started reading The Water Margin during winter break, and I really just fell in love with it. Before that, I was researching late Qing literature. I moved back into like sort of the Ming and Qing periods. And then, in 2014, I decided I want to do a dissertation on The Water Margin and its commentaries and its sequels. And here I am today.
Oh, there you go. So as a native Cantonese speaker, I mean, do you still speak it or?
My Cantonese speaking is quite bad. However, I did recently score a ILR 5 for Chinese, and so I'm pretty proud of that. So that's native level. Of course, that sort of thing. It's one thing where you prepare for it and you can deliver it. Not to sustain it, that's always a challenge. Of course, students will take my class, I'm happy to talk about language too, which is another one of my expertise.
Oh, that's impressive. For people that don't know ILR 5, that's the Interagency Language Roundtable. And it's like, to me, it's my favorite way of assessing language. I think it makes a lot of sense in a way that some of the other tests don't. And ILR 5 is uh, functionally indistinguishable from a native speaker, from an educated native speaker, right? And okay, that sounds good, but what that means, there's this video on Vimeo that I like to show people. Maybe you've seen it, and it's this guy talking about, um, oh, I forget the question, but it's like, is the computer making man in his own image or something like that? And this guy gives this like long-winded, like very erudite educational, educated opinion on it, and it's like, the, I would think he was American, but he's not. He's a non-native speaker, and that seeing that blows people away, going like, "Wow, that's okay. That's what an ILR 5 is." So that's very impressive. Um, I've known one or two, maybe at the most, non-native speakers that have that. So, and yeah, maintaining it. I might have been a 3+ or a 4 when I was in grad school in Taiwan. Not anymore.
That's really good. That's really
Maintaining
good.
it is a different story. So I know I could get back to it, but it's a bit of a slog.
Yeah,
Well,
for
so I was
sure.
wondering if you ever tried reading tongue poetry in Cantonese. That was actually my original thing that I was going to ask related to that. But I guess if you don't speak it very much anymore, then
Yeah, I mean, as a lifelong learner, I think Cantonese is definitely in the books for something I want to pursue again.
mhm.
And of course, a lot of linguistics. I'm sure that you and a lot of professionals know that Cantonese does have its roots in sort of the more pre-modern pronunciations. So in
Mhm.
fact, a lot of the rhyme and also the 入声 really come out and pop when
Yeah,
you speak it in the dialects, right? So
yeah,
yeah, that's another topic. But I'm here to talk to you about the water margin. So any questions you have about the water margin, I'm happy to talk about it.
yeah, yeah. Well, so okay, you got into this as you were getting into grad school, and then so what was your dissertation about related to the water margin specifically? I mean, you said commentaries and whatnot, but can you give a little more detail?
Yeah, so I think with scholarship, there's always been this long-standing perspective that Chinese fiction novels aren't very serious. They're written to entertain. They may be didactic, like to sort of teach common people to behave a certain way.
Mhm.
However, if you look at the research and you really read these works closely, you'll find that there's a period in Chinese history, which is about the 16th and 17th century, where there was a very concerted effort to elevate the status of fiction. And one way that the literati did this was to borrow the traditions and the sort of methods and approaches from the Confucian exegetical tradition to read fiction novels seriously. And not only that, the commentators would make edits to the work. They would really reshape it to make it more complex. So now you have this what I call an interpretation complex, where there is a significant interaction between reader, author, text, commentator. And then when you get into the 18th, 19th centuries, and you have sequels coming out of these famous works, which also have commentaries, it becomes even more complex. So a lot of my work as a literary scholar has been to sort of look at the development of fiction, to look at ways in which fiction, commentaries, and sequels were sort of its own tradition and its own sort of complex of development, aside from the different literary genres that were growing and developing during that time.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, a lot of the people that are on the stream here have taken our classical Chinese courses, and we did a lot of reading commentary, so they're at least somewhat familiar with that tradition as well, both classical and modern commentary. So, oh, that's very cool. Oh, there was something else I was going to ask that. Oh, yeah, yeah. So, as a sort of getting to know you thing, because there's a lot of people I think uh, thinking about signing up, and they don't know you yet. You haven't taught any courses for us yet. I know you taught at the DLI for a while. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure. So the Defense Language Institute, it's an army base in Monterey, California, which is about 80 miles south of where I am right now.
Mm,
And they have all the strategic languages: Russian, they have Chinese, they have Arabic, Korean. And so Chinese is one of those programs where it's 64 weeks. And audience, imagine this. They are to get all the servicemen and women from zero to advanced in a year and a half. What does that mean? You are undergoing the language fire hose every day. 5 to 6 hours of class a day. Then you have 3 hours homework at home. If you test poorly, you get kicked out or you get recycled into a previous class. So I did a lot of language teaching during that time. And I feel that that experience really opened me up to sort of the nuances of the Chinese language that really helped with, understanding novels and being able to interpret them. Of course, I went in as a literary scholar teaching language, but whenever I had opportunities, I would teach my students a lot of the different literature, including the Water Margin and the other masterworks. So it's just a really good experience. Before that, as a doctoral student, I was also a teacher. So I would teach some literature classes, some Chinese philosophy classes for our department. So I have lots of good teaching experience. I really appreciate debate I have with my students. So if you're the type of students where you're a more autonomous learner, you want to explore, I have a lot of resources for you. I can support you on your journey. If you're the type of student where, hey, Mr. Lam, I could use some guidance, I'm happy to provide that guidance, sort of walk you through and for you to better appreciate the work or to have a deeper understanding of Chinese language, literature, and culture.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, you saying the 64 weeks thing, it reminded me of a friend who used to, I think he said they would threaten to get you fluent within 64 weeks.
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
it's a really cool environment, and I think part of being a army civilian and professor there is instilled in me a lot of discipline and just and students. I just want to let you know that I'm already preparing my slides. I have a lot of good content for you. For me, it's really about it was always a passion project, and now it's something I can do professionally and to assist you. So I'm really excited for this class. I think you're going to get a lot of it and enjoy it a lot.
yeah, it seems like it's going to be a lot of fun. Can we talk a little bit because I emailed you last week asking about the different editions and whatnot. And then I also got an email from someone this morning wanting to know, can they read, and I think that person is probably on the stream, can they read it in Chinese instead of English? I think the answer is yes, but can you talk a little bit about the Shapiro translation and various editions and whatnot?
Of course.
Yeah.
So I briefly went through the editor notes for the Shapiro edition. If you have it hard copy, that's great because there's lots of good information there. And basically, what Sidney Shapiro, master translator, by the way, he decided with his team that it's best to use Jin Sheng Tan's 70 chapter edition, which is much better edited, more clean, more just a lot more tight compared with like the other editions, and to add the 30 chapters, last 30 chapters from the 100 chapter edition. So what we're actually reading with the English edition by Shapiro is a hybrid of the 70 chapter and 100 chapter edition. And as I will talk about in my slides, this actually offers us a lot of advantage as readers of the translation. And for those of you who decide, hey, I want to read the Chinese edition, I'm going to walk you through sort of the best way to approach that, especially with regards to the different editions that we have. If you do want to read it in the original, my suggestion is going to be to read his 70 chapter edition, which I have access to for you. And then the last 30 chapters, you can go to the Rongyu Tang edition, which I'll talk about in the slides as well.
Okay, cool. And there is, for anyone wondering, there is a like a free online edition of the Shapiro translation as well, which we can give you if you sign up for the course. I'll give you a link where you can download that. Obviously, I'm a hard copy fan, but yeah, if you prefer to have a digital edition, that is out there. We have a question from Scott. What's the language like in the original? Is it very classical, or is it a step pre-modern with a somewhat colloquial flavor, or somewhere in between?
Scott, that's an excellent question, and I'm happy to answer that to the best of my ability. Basically, the water margin is written in the sort of 白话小说 mode, which is a sort of vernacular. So the way that it's written, it's as if someone in pre-modern China was speaking in sort of the spoken style. However, you'll find that there's lots of different ways in which the literati or the people editing the works sort of enhanced it or elevated it using the classical language. So, for example, you'll see poems that were written in 7 character Qian verse. You also see just different types of lexicon used that are more classical. However, if I were to say which is more classical, the Sanguo or the Shuǐ, definitely the Sanguo. And of course, that's because a lot of it is sourced from historical texts. And in terms of the agenda of the author slash commentator, they're likely trying to preserve the sort of the style of the history while adding sort of that 小说 flavor to it. Whereas the 水浒 is definitely more colloquial. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I haven't read Shui Hu myself, but I read parts of Sangguo, and I always had the feeling it's like it's almost Mandarin, and it's almost modern Chinese, but then with a bunch of Wenyan thrown in there. So if Shui Hu was even more I was going to say colloquial, but vernacular than that, then that's probably more approachable, I would think. Cool. Okay, well, I think that's a good place to transition into your presentation. If you want to pull up your slides, I'll put them up on screen here, and I'll let you do your thing.
Sure. Let me pull those up right now. All right.
There we go.
All right. Well, John, thank you again so much for having me on board. And I just want to say what a great pleasure it is to be here to talk to you about the water margin. In terms of the Chinese novelistic tradition, it's definitely my favorite novel. And I really hope that you have a chance to join me on exploring this work as it relates to Chinese culture and the art of 小说. So some things I'll cover today, I'll look at some of the key terms. We'll go over a little bit of textual history on the various editions. And for points 3, 4, and 5, I'm going to focus a little bit about my approach to analyzing and teaching this class. And then last, I'll of course be talking about some of the things that'll be included in the course. Now, the concept of novel in the Chinese literary tradition is very different from the West, but for the convenience, we're going to call 小说 the vernacular fiction novel. Now, when we read the novel in Chinese, some novels, despite having influence from classical Chinese, are quite vernacular in its language and the way it's delivered. So it's vernacular in the sense that novels are written the way Chinese was spoken in pre-modern times. Another important term is the 小说评点, or the fiction commentaries. And a lot of my research focused on the 17th century, which witnessed a very interesting phenomenon where writers elevated fiction to a new status as a serious literary work worthy of being analyzed and critiqued. So from this change came fiction commentaries, and they were written to sort of aid the reader in understanding as part of the cultural and literary aspects of the course. The fiction commentaries to the Water Margin were one of the most innovative commentaries written, and they would shape the literary criticism of this work and the direction of vernacular fiction in China. And of course, we're going to focus on the Water Margin. As John has talked about, there are various titles. I prefer Water Margin, and of course, in the course, I'll talk to you a little about why that's the more appropriate title. And as far as the author, it's attributed to Shi Nai'an, and I say attributed because in scholarship, there's still a lot of contention about the authorship of this work, especially with regards to its complex textual history. So let's take a look at this diagram on the left here. Let me pull up the laser pointer. Let's see, here we are. So at the top, in pink, we see what we call the original. And the development of the Water Margin as a text, it's very complicated because in the 21st century, we have very limited number of extant editions in our time. It's agreed upon scholars that at one point there was a source, or rather a series of sources and materials and stories that would make up the sort of original Fanbun text here at the top. This would be the source of the 100-chapter edition to the left, or the Rongyu Tangbun. Now, in an effort to rectify the text, the literary critic Jin Shengtan would delete 30 chapters from the 100-chapter edition and make serious edits to construct the 70-chapter edition in green, otherwise known as the Guanhua Tangbun. Last, we have the 120-chapter edition in purple, edited and put back together by Yuan Wuya, and it was published sometimes between the 16th and 17th century. So one question is, well, is one edition better than the other? And this is a really big debate. I'm always happy to discuss more. The general consensus among scholars is that the 70-chapter edition is much more compact, it's cleaner, and well edited, whereas the 100-chapter edition has a better story arc. So we're going to read Shapiro's edition, which combines the best of both worlds. And that presents to us a lot of different advantages. We're able to read and appreciate a more refined, edited version of the story. We can experience the story arc, and we also have a chance to explore the complexities of these two competing editions, how they interact with one another, especially as it relates to what I call the Water Margin complex of interpretation, with various interconnections between novel original, editions, commentaries, and even sequels. Sorry, are you able to see that, John? Something's going on with my screen.
Yeah, it just got pixelated. I'm not sure what's going on there.
Okay, it's okay now.
No, it's just black.
Oh, what? Okay, let me share my screen again.
Yep.
Okay. So my approach is mainly focused on the theory of reader response and the study of interpretation. And John, is it on now?
It's on, but it's only taking up part of the screen. Okay, there we go. It's full screen now.
Okay. All right. So my approach is really focused on the interaction between the reader, author, text, and sort of the paratext materials, like the commentator and the commentaries that he writes. So we know the author is defined as the person who wrote the text. The text, of course, is the work itself. And the reader are people like you and I, and even readers in pre-modern times who bring their own experience, perspectives, and questions into the reading process. So a lot of what some of what I'll look at in the class is how the commentator acts as a middleman and intervenes by guiding the reader in understanding the text. And one issue is that these commentaries, without the sort of training in the classical language and literary terminology, oftentimes is not accessible. And it's just a bit to read. So one of my tasks as an instructor of this course, in addition to talking about the plot and the artistry of the work, is to really give you access to these commentaries so we can deepen our understanding of the work and to give you a perspective on the work that you won't find anywhere else. And in certain parts of the lesson, we are definitely going to explore the sort of genius of the commentator, ways in which his interventions reshape the text and the reading experience. And here's an edition of the water margin with Jin Shangtang's commentaries. So you can see that the main text of the novel are the larger characters, and the elements circled in green there, they take up quite a bit of space, right? And so for the pre-modern reader, the commentaries are supposed to complement the reading of the main text. We get a glimpse into the reading practices of pre-modern Chinese scholars in that they read the text seriously and with scholarly study in mind. It's like if we were to read Augustine's commentaries to the Bible or Zhuxi's commentaries to the Confucian Analects. They're not cliff notes. It's not a summary, but these are serious scholarly interpretations of the novel. And what we'll learn is ways in which the Confucian exegetical tradition influenced interpretation of the Water Margin and other fiction novels as well. At the same time, I feel like whenever I read the novel, it's a lot of fun, and it reveals to me the narrative power of the Chinese vernacular fiction tradition. So, in addition to telling a story in ways one expects in a novel, the narrator sometimes breaks the fourth wall. The gentle reader, take note. And we're taken back to the days of Ming and Qing dynastic China. It could be a social gathering in tea houses or storytelling parlors, where the Chinese storyteller narrates the journeys of these magnificent heroes. So another focus of the class is going to be the nuances of the storyteller's manner in the novel, the fiction conventions, ways the author deepens the artistry of fiction through various literary devices, characterization, and descriptions. Okay. So what exactly is the Water Margin about? The story takes place in the Northern Song Dynasty, roughly around 1120 AD. And it focuses on the 108 Hao Han, these bandit heroes, and most of them are forced to become outlaws after suffering injustice at the hands of the corrupt officials. They established a sworn fraternity at the water margin, or Liangshan, and they, of course, constantly face this dilemma of Zhongyan Yi. Should I be loyal to the emperor, or should I maintain my sworn fraternal honor? And it's this juxtaposition that constitutes the main tension of the novel. In terms of the structure, it's episodic. So that means that each chapter is going to be sort of its own individual story, but with attention to the overall story arc. So there's continuity between for the plot. And in the story, we bear witness to the gathering of all 108 heroes, their journeys, their different personalities. And of course, in the backdrop, there's the Khitan Liao Empire in the north, threatening to invade the northern Song and threatening the way of life of these heroes. So there's going to be lots of different themes and motifs that we can explore in this novel. It's very rich, and I'm really excited to explore that with you. A lot of people may have the question, well, is it historical or is it just fiction? And there are certainly kernels of factual history in the novel because the whole premise is based on these group of outlaws that were documented in the Shenhe Yishi. This is a historical text that in one section documents the exploits of the actual water margin outlaws in history. So, and we know if you read the history, it's going to be very straightforward, right? Just the facts, as objective as possible. Now, when these stories are borrowed from history, now fictionalized in the water margin, everything becomes more radicalized and hyperbolic. when you read the bandit heroes and their battles, or they're battling a tiger or something, they appear even more noble. They're more loyal, more violent, more cunning than they've been depicted in the history books. And I think that that sort of radicalization of these heroes is one thing that I really enjoy, and that I'm happy to share in my analyses with the classes. Now, one thing we need to pay attention to as well is that a book like The Water Margin, it has these vivid descriptions of sex, violence, disease, heroics, and sort of these implications of rebellion, right? It's definitely not going to be a favorite text of the government, right, of the Ming and Qing government. And literary critics were also very concerned, like, hey, if someone just picks this up and read this, they might get carried away with this message. Okay, and you have one Qing commentator who even notes that everyone may read The Water Margin, but many misread it and fail to carefully experience it. So comments like these are very important because they attest to this idea that the possibilities for misinterpretation are always present, and that there needs to be a commentator or some sort of a text, a paratext, to guide you through reading this work. And one question that has excited readers for centuries in terms of how to read the work is, the Hao Han, can he really be a hero? Or is he just this evil outlaw out there to gather money and grow this gang? Who should the reader be rooting for? Our heroes in the stories, they flee to Liangshan, right, to this hideout of the Gaon fraternity. But are they just out there robbing and killing and causing trouble? And certainly some of them are pretty crafty, and honor can be equated with bribery sometimes. So one way that some people have tended to read the novel is that they're these evil bandits, the Qiang Dao, right? And they kill and rob only to benefit their group, and they show this kind of evil without a shred of goodness. But then you have other people who say, no, no, 他们是豪杰, right? They're these heroes, 他们是好汉, right? They're decent, they're simple and honest, they're good-hearted, really good at martial arts, just really good at fighting, and then they go out of their ways to help people in the name of justice. So, we have these really awesome heroes like Wu Song, who fights the tiger, Lu Zhishan, who saves locals from this evil butcher. We have Lin Chong, who has this really amazing spear fighting. I'm really excited to share some of those fight scenes with you and analyze them together. And then we also have these different hero cycles, right? A very common one is seen in the chapter related to Wu Song. So a lot of you probably heard Wu Song Da Hu, the sort of Wu Song fights the tiger. One episode I'm really interested in, and you may hear this from another instructor who's teaching the Jinping Mei, is this sort of quarrel between Pan Jinlian, the sister-in-law of Wu Song, and the death of Wu Song's brother. So his brother's poisoned to death. And then this fraternal honor is challenged, right? And so it causes this whole hero cycle of having to avenge the death of his brother. And the only way he's going to be able to do that is to go and do this Confucian ritual, which is to sacrifice the perpetrators at his brother's spirit altar. So there's a lot going on there. There's this sort of Confucian honor your family perspective going on there. There's some Taoism and Buddhism going on there. So actually, there's lots of philosophical thought in this work that I think that can be fleshed out a bit more. Now, I can't say whether Wu Song is successful, though I suspect that a lot of you who are familiar with the story probably already know. It's one of the most memorable stories in the novel, and I really hope that you'll join me in this course so we can analyze and look at it together. Now, using our historical imagination, we can think about what it's like to be a scholar in 17th century China. They had the elegance and comfort of the scholar's studio to read whatever they'd like. As avid readers of The Water Margin, they probably really enjoyed the martial feats and all the amazing descriptions in the book. But what I want to point out is that the story and the description in this work moved them in a certain way. And this act of reading, it became a sort of unique pastime, as both an escape from and a reflection of a society in moral decline. So especially in that transition from the Ming to the Qing, there was a rise in popularity of this work. And some of those cultural and historical elements is something that I hope to explore with you together. So what's included in this course? This is just a sample of what you can expect from me. While working on my doctoral degree, I spent countless hours exploring primary sources, historical sources, secondary sources, this novel, and various commentaries, sequels, and iterations. I've given lots of talks, I've published articles, but what really brought me joy was really teaching my students and experiencing the literature together. So what I offer in this course is a unique exploration of the work so that we can better appreciate this novelistic tradition. I will also offer a lot of research-based perspectives as it relates to Chinese culture and philosophy, so Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, as well as historical perspectives. And like I said before, you're going to come in with lots of different motivation, and I'm going to be there to provide any resources you need and really guide you, whether it's in the original text in English or if you just want to learn more. I believe that discussion is a really critical component of the course, and of course, I'll be very active in the forum to address any questions you have, and I'm committed to providing a good Q&A for students in the office hour live format. And last but not least, John and Outlier Linguistics promises a lifetime access to these materials for you to revisit anytime. Thank you so much for listening to this talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much. Oh, John, am I coming through?
I just realized I'm muted.
Oh,
You were fine. I
thank
was.
you.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, man. I appreciate that. Um, there are a couple of questions in the chat I'll get to in just a moment. I had one though. And while we're talking about this, anybody that's got other questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to them. So you talked about some of the sort of moralizing in the commentary, or at least the fact that they're sort of directing the reader to a correct and orthodox interpretation of what's going on. Is that moralizing philosophy there? Is it more or less Neo-Confucian in nature, or I mean, what's the overall thrust at this time, this period of time?
Yeah, it's hard to draw a connection between the sort of Wang Yangming, Xin Xue, sort of like the school of the mind, with Jin Shengtan's commentaries, for example.
Hmm.
Jin Shengtan was a very eccentric figure. He seemed to have had a following, though. But when you look at the way in which he quote unquote, rectifies the text, it's very clear he's doing sort of Confucian 考证 work. 考证 being the sort of philological work to sort of rescue this text from the flames of this image of rebellion. So the ways in which the characters are described, the commentaries that he adds, really, and we'll talk about this more. He tries to make the water margin a sort of cautionary tale. In fact, cautionary tale. This is something that's very common as a motif
Yep.
in Chinese literature, and of course in various literature of different cultures as well. So it's a very interesting thing that he does. To sort of rectify the text, and that's the term he uses. Is zheng. Zheng, of course, is to rectify.
Interesting. And in that vein, uh, I've got a question in that vein, but let's go to Haku's question here. What do you think of the poetry? Reading the intro to John and Alex's translation. I'm not sure who John and Alex are. They think it's mostly trashy.
Right. So Haku, the Jin Shengtan actually did a lot of the work for you. If you look at the 120 chapter edition, there seems to be poetry like every like 4 or 5 paragraphs. So Jin Shengtan did a good job of cutting out a lot of the bad poetry for you. Yes, it does disrupt from the narrative, and a lot of it's really sort of ornate qian, these sort of 7 character classical verse. So I think that when we read, for example, the English translation or the editions that I can provide, a lot of that poetry that distracts from the narrative are going to be taken out. Now, I cannot comment on the sort of style of the poetry. Experts like Dr. Michael Fuller and those who study Chinese poetry seriously can tell you how bad they are. However, you also find that these commentators and editors who are adding the poetries back into the water margin, they were also likely aspiring poets. Maybe some of their poems never made it to the wide literati circles, ended up in the novel. These things do happen. If you look at extant works by the commentator Jin Shengtan, for example, he has a bunch of poetry that has sort of gone unlooked at. In fact, I think there was a seminar by a UC SB professor on bad poetry, especially in the Ming. Haku, I'm looking forward to meeting you. I'm looking forward to talking to you more about this phenomenon of bad poetry.
That's really interesting. Does Dr. Fuller do work on the poetry in water margin specifically?
No, so he is a song specialist, and of course he has all those books on classical Chinese. Now that anthology on poetry,
Yep.
so I think he would have a lot to say about
Some
a
opinions.
lot of those poems may have been added during the Yuan dynasty, actually, if we believe that that's when the work was truly published. So he may have a lot to say about the sort of aesthetics of those poems.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's somebody told me that this is a sort of a parallel, that Qing dynasty calligraphy was garbage, and I don't have the enough appreciation of it to know what good and bad calligraphy. Um, Yeah, a lot of them will know Dr. Fuller because we used his textbook for the classical Chinese courses. Um, let's see. Yeah, how much and what kind of reading should we expect each week
Okay.
from Scott?
Thank you, Scott, for this question. So, I'm going at a pace of 8 chapters per week. Of course, you can always go at your own pace. I'm likely going to add some secondary sources if people are interested, but that's not a requirement for the course. I wanted to have discussion questions at the end of every lesson, and that's something you can bring into the Q&A. You can also answer those questions if you want to write uh, in the forum, or if you want to submit it to me. So there is a writing component, of course, the lessons itself. But yeah, about 8 chapters per week.
Okay, and it's if I'm not wrong, it's pretty fun, easy reading, right? I mean, it's not super
Oh
dense,
yeah,
like hard
yeah.
going.
It's Yeah, like by the time you get to Jin Ping Mei and Hong Lou Meng, right? This is when the ornateness of fiction really comes out. So
Yeah.
there's lots of description. There's lots of digressions. It's just more evolved. Not that the water margin isn't, but the water margin, it really is about getting you to that action. It's about having you read more. Like, oh, I really want to know what happens. In fact, we'll learn about ways in which the storyteller breaks the fourth wall and says, "Hey, come on, keep reading. There's lots of good stuff in the next chapter." Um, so when I read it, I really feel like I'm at the tea house. And I'm giving the guy a tip because I want to read more. So even though it says 8 chapters, I promise you, it's going to go by fast. It's going to be so fun, and you're going to find things that are striking to you. And I really hope that you bring those to the Q&A or in the discussion board, so we can discuss together. As much as I say, okay, I'm an expert in that. For me, 活到老学到老. I'm always a student, so I'm always learning myself too, and it'd be great to learn from everyone on this platform as well.
Let's see, Peter. Well, he had one question related to that, which you've already answered. The other, any comments or on adaptations to movies or other media?
Hmm. So if you can find the Cantonese one with subtitles, that's probably one of the best ones. CCTV I think released an edition in the late 1990s or the early 2000s. That's also quite good, and you can access it on YouTube. In fact, as part of the course, in addition to analyzing the text and providing some lecture and discussion, I will also include some of the footage from the video adaptation, so we can really immerse ourselves in the text via what I call reinterpretations or representations of the water margin via film.
Oh, very cool. Let's see. Jim asks, just click for me that the very idea behind the novel's composition is anti-authoritarian. How is this viewed? I'm from the U.S., and I guess I'm not that knowledgeable about it.
Thank you, Jim. This is a great question. And well, first thing I'll say is that Shuǐ Hǔ Zhuàn was Mao Zedong's one of his favorite books. And of course, if we think of Mao Zedong as a reader of the book, right? One thing that he had told the comrades was, "Well, 这是一本政治书. This is a political book." So you can certainly read it as a political book. For me, we can definitely look at the sort of political messages of the book. Also note too that it was sort of re-edited and reinvented in the Ming Dynasty, and so it was separated by a couple of dynasties, and it definitely did that on purpose, right? Because you don't want to write something that would get the attention of the government, or government starts thinking you're trying to start a rebellion through this really sort of exciting book. So yes, I think that there are aspects of the novel that can be read as anti-authoritarian. If this is an interpretation you want to pursue, uh, I'm happy to do that with you. I think that's very interesting. uh, so it can be read in various different ways, and that's the whole contention and the enjoyment of the work, right? You can say, hey, these are very honorable heroes. At the same time, oh, they're just bandits. They're just pillaging and killing anytime they want to, right? So, Jim, this is a great question, and more to explore in the course.
Yeah. Haku has a follow-on. Is Liangshanbo not an authoritative institution?
Yeah, so the Liangshan, well, it's there's lots of scholarship on this, on sort of the political contours of the Liangshanbo, this the Liangshan Marsh. Um, yeah, I haven't really looked at the sort of the analysis of the location in the work. What I can say is that historically, it was serious enough for the Song government to pay attention. And then when you take the historical fact and those details and add them to fiction, uh, and there are definitely scenes where the government says, "Oh, there's these group of bandits gathering in Shandong. What should we do?" Uh, so there is this dynamic or this dichotomy of sort of the freedom of being Liangshan and to abide by the imperial authority, and that's one of the tensions we're definitely going to explore in the work.
Cool. Let's see. We've got a few more questions. Let's see. Any comments on S.L. Huang's The Water Outlaws, inspired by The Water Margin? Are you familiar with that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Which question was this?
This is
Oh,
it's up on here. Any comments on S.L. Huang's The Water Outlaws, inspired by Water Margin?
yeah. I've never heard of that. Is that like some sort of spin-off or like a film? S.L. Hong's The Water Outlaws.
Yeah, Debbie, if you could put some more info in the chat there, it might be interesting for us to look into. Let's see. John asks, "Does Water Margin remind you of the Robin Hood stories?"
So that connection has been made a lot. The fact that they're these sort of good-natured bandits slash robbers who steal from the good and give it to people in need.
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly some connections, I think, in terms of this sort of just being on being on the outside and helping those in need. Uh, I think just the nature of the novel and the source in which it comes from, there are definitely differences. But it is reminiscent of those Robin Hood stories for sure.
Cool. Let's see. Haku's got another question. How is the fact that the 108 heroes being literal demons released from captivity play into the story? It seems to have been forgotten.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing I noticed about the chapter one is it really is more like a preamble. And if you look at the 70 chapter edition of the novel, that's exactly what the commentary does. He makes that first chapter a sort of preamble to the main story. And as I'll talk about in my lesson next week, the author actually manipulates time really well in the first chapter, and that's why the first chapter should be read as sort of this prologue, because there is this sort of mystical. It's almost a Taoist story, right, in the beginning, to sort of get you into the main narrative of the water margin. Um, and in terms of the artistry of the writing, there seems to be always a certain type of anxiety on part of the quote unquote author in how we start how we start the novel, how we get people interested. So sometimes there's always these sort of mystical stories in order to sort of contextualize it in the Song Dynasty history and so on. Even more so in the Hong Lou Meng, where there's just this really long, 2 or 3 chapters of this sort of origin story to really until you really get into the narrative.
Interesting. Let's see. The poetry in the book is a remnant of the storytelling style of Water Margin. The poems themselves hold average literary value, but they reflect the popular literature nature of Water Margin.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting that you point out. You said that the poetry is a remnant of the storytelling style. Certainly, the Shuō the storytellers in pre-modern times, they may have thrown poetry in their performance to sort of rouse up the audience or to sort of get them interested. Um, my reading and the research that I follow, it looks more at the poetry as sort of interventions from literati, whether anonymous or attributed commentator or even publishing houses. So one thing we have to pay attention to is that we do have all these editions. We say we have these 3 or 4 main editions, but in the 17th century, we don't know exactly how many editions of the novel were there. There could have been several publishing houses publishing their editions, selling it, really trying to promote it. So I think that's an interesting point, that the connection between poetry and the storytelling style. At the same time, we want to uh, uh, pay more attention as well to the sort of material history in which this book was born out of.
Let's see. Debbie gives some more info about the S.L. Huang book. Newly out, a reimagining where women are the characters.
I'm going to have to check that out, Debbie. I
Yep.
haven't heard of that. I do know in one of the Shuǐ Hǔ Zhuàn sequels called Dan Kou Zhi, called The Bandits, there is a female warrioress character who just beats the out of some of the Liangshan heroes. So the sort of female warrior as a trope, I think you can see that in Jin Yong's novels, which is something that I'm also
Mhm.
interested in as well, and as well as 19th century Qing water margin sequels. Very interesting.
That reminds me of one of the questions I was going to ask. So it is like a precursor to like wuxia novels and stuff. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So Jin Yong was clearly a reader of the water margin.
Mm.
Even if you read, for example, some of his famous work, the Condor Heroes, for example, the first 20 pages, one of the main characters is a descendant of one of the water margin characters, right? So, and Jin Yong, of course, places his stories in the Song Dynasty as well. So there's sort of these interconnections between the sort of the wuxia novels and the Song Dynasty water margin world. Not that they're the same universe in the sense that we have in sort of modern times with all these different things like MCU stuff like that. But Jin Yong clearly was paying homage to that tradition, and he grew out of that tradition. That's I think that's a fairly accurate statement.
Mm. Um, let's see. We've got a few others here. Well, actually, because I have a related question to that one that we. You mentioned one of the characters in Jin Yong's novels being a descendant of one of the characters here. Isn't in Jinping Mei isn't the main character in Jinping Mei also one of the characters in this? There's like a connection there too, right?
Yes, correct. In fact, in a lot of my research, I've also written about the Jinping Mei. I read that in a graduate seminar with my professor, and I tend to read the Jinping Mei as a spin-off of the Shuǐ Hǔ Zhuàn.
Mm.
In certain ways, I also read it as a parody of the Shuǐ Hǔ Zhuàn because oftentimes Jinping Mei, it's also very complex. There's two or three different editions.
Yep.
If you read the one of the earliest editions before it was edited and turned into this more sort of ornate work, it actually pokes fun at the sworn fraternity quite a bit.
Mm.
Yeah, I read it as a parody of the Shuihu, and also, growing out of the water margin tradition as well, because it pulls the story straight from it. I think there are some scholars in Asia who have identified ways in which it just, straight up just, wholesale pulls the content from that specific chapter. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great point.
I think Brendan in the live stream he did about Jinping Mei, he said that it basically started as fanfic of the water
Yeah,
margin.
I think that's a very modern 21st century way of looking at it, right?
Yeah.
It's like it was fan fiction and it just evolved into something else. It was a sort of spin-off that the reader of the water margin, now turned author of the Jinping Mei, was so fascinated by the story that he had to do something about it. So he is what I have called, and the term I use is sort of reader turned writer. Uh,
Mm.
yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's see. Haku says there's certain nothing like Robin Hood. They care nothing about wealth redistribution for the common people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a valid point. In fact, in some of the stories you'll find they'll like help a few commoners, but they're a lot of it's just very isolated incidents. And then after that, the Liangshan Haohan, they're just building themselves up. And we'll also go into the complexity of that, the sort of circulation of money in the work. That's also very interesting. A lot of different themes and tropes related to money and the common people as well.
Interesting. Let's see. Eric asks, can you speak on the significance of 108,618? Is there any Buddhist influence in this story? I would think, right?
Yeah, yeah. That the numbers are significant. The 108, I'm sorry, this fell out. The 108, I know that corresponds to one of the star constellations in Taoism. So the Buddhism piece, I'm currently working on it and learning more. Just how Buddhism relates to some of the numbers that are being used, or some of the numerology as well.
Hmm. Interesting. Let's see. I think there were 3 or 4 women in the 108. Haku says, is that right?
Haku, I think you're right, and I'll have to go and review my list. But there were a few women.
Hmm.
One thing that I noticed too is that not all 108 heroes get the sort of really flowery and really detailed description. It seems that I think some of the women too were left out. Um, I'm really glad that you brought this up, Haku, because I also focus on sort of Chinese masculinities and in gender in general. So that's definitely one theme that we're going to talk about. Just sort of how this sort of masculinity is embodied through the way the heroes are described, the roles of women characters, sort of their place in the novel, their significance, and so on. So that's going to be something that I'll be talking about in later chapters.
Oh, very cool. Uh, he says Jean P. May being the Chinese 50 Shades of Grey. That's probably
Yeah.
off.
Oh, yeah. That's no. I don't know enough about the 50 Shades of Grey. I think maybe it was some sort of they're doing fan fiction for something else, right? But
I think it
yeah, I
started.
mean it's
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's true. Like a lot of these people who are reading the Water Margin, they oftentimes were aspiring writers, right? They in ways they wanted to be the author.
Mm.
And that's also where Jim May kind of grows out of. Even the commentators, they make these interesting claims like, "Oh, I know the intention of the author," right? But in ways, they are sort of transferring the authority of the author to themselves to say,
Those-
"Hey, you got to read my commentaries, otherwise you're going to miss the message completely."
The real
So
man.
there's yeah, there's so much at play, and I hope that I can unpack a lot of that during the course. Of course, a bit of the course is going to be talking about the stories and the artistry of the work, but as far as those complexities and their interpretation, that's going to be a very exciting piece as well.
Oh, cool. Let's see. I'm going to scroll back through and see if I've missed any comments. I think we've covered all of them. I did have a question, though, kind of on that uh, 50 Shades of Grey note. So you mentioned there's, scenes of sex and violence and stuff. Is it, I don't think it has quite the reputation of being lurid that Jinping May has, but is it along similar lines in that respect, or?
So they're few and far between. Like the sex scenes, I think really is just that Pan Jinlian episode mainly. The sister-in-law who's trying to seduce the brother-in-law, right? Um, it's Jimmy May is going to take those themes of desire and the issue of desire and really elevate it to just a whole different level.
Mm,
Um, I believe the translator of the authoritative English translation, I think his name is Roy, right?
yeah.
Professor Roy says that if you read the Jinping Mei, well, there's actually some Buddhist messages there about desire.
Mm,
And then if you read the commentaries in Jinping Mei, they say, well, if you're reading these scenes and you're getting lustful, actually that's not what you're supposed to do. You're
mm,
supposed to read these and have this sort of feeling of being cautioned against desire. Um, yeah, I know that the question doesn't really answer about the water margin, but I think it's important to emphasize that piece about the Jinping Mei and the fact that the water margin is really focused on sort of that political and then also the masculinity of the heroes. Um, the issue of desire and sex is probably one of the tropes,
mm.
but not the main one.
Okay, interesting. And Haku wants to know who's your favorite character. His is Yenqing.
For me, there's so many. I don't know. Maybe this is like kind of fair weather, but I like Wu Song a lot. Like he's, I feel like, and then I think it's not so much my reading of Wu Song in the original text as much as like the way that Jin Sheng Tan describes him in the commentaries and helps me understand his role and the fact that he's just so amazing in the sequels. And that's something unfortunately we won't be able to access, but he is just so amazing in the sequels and the way that he battles against sort of his counterparts, who are these sort of government mandated heroes, is just so amazing. So Wu Song, I think, is going to be my favorite for sure.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Uh, well, maybe you could, at the end of the course, suggest, which sequels to read and, so people can go and do their own thing after. Um,
yeah.
let's see. We have, I admire your knowledge and research on various versions. Yeah, there's a lot to know there, right? I mean, it's, with any pre-modern text, there's going to be multiple editions and,
Yeah.
different versions floating around.
Yeah. And in fact, I saw the tree of editions recently, and there's actually another branch where the text was imported and translated in Japan as well. So then you have this whole Shuǐ world, Suikoden world in Japan, which of course a lot of you probably know has turned into like the video games and like anime and stuff like that. So there's actually this whole other Shuǐ universe in Japan that's really amazing. translations of the works. Jisung Tang's commentaries made it there. Japanese scholars in pre-modern Japan also wrote commentaries, and unfortunately, due to the language, I don't have access to that. But I do know the people who did research on that stuff. So for those of you who are Japanese speakers or interested, I can definitely try to dig those out for you.
Yeah, it's huge in Japan. I actually I knew Sui Koden before I realized that it was Shuǐ Hǔ Zhuàn. I had heard
Nice.
the word, I had seen it written on things like in Latin letters, and I didn't make the connection with the novel until much later. So yeah, it's big here for sure. So, all right, that brings us pretty close to the end of the hour, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up. I think we've addressed all the questions. There are a few people that chimed in and said, like Josh says, he's been to DLI and knows some of the teachers there. He's 2 hours from Monterey.
Hi,
Jim,
Josh. We're kind of neighbors.
yeah. Jim says when he was in college at University of Chicago, he met someone who had learned some Chinese at DLI and knew somebody who had been a professor at DLI. So lots of connections there. That's very cool. Uh,
Yeah, that's really awesome.
as many people as are learning Chinese, like it's kind of a small world, really. Still,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have my secret clearance still, but I think I can talk about this. You mean like a DLI, right?
hmm?
Are you asking if people at the DLR are a lot of people are learning Chinese?
No, no, no. I was just saying there's a ton of people in the world learning Chinese, but it's
Oh
still
yeah, yeah,
still a small world. You
yeah,
bump into people all the time that know each other and whatnot.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, that Jim just kind of reinvigorated sort of my memories of just yeah, there's so many servicemen and women learning Chinese too, and of course just in the world. So it's really fascinating, and I'm really glad that I'm able to be part of the language and the literature. And John, thanks for having me on board today, and I look forward to meeting all of you next week.
yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, guys. I'm going to put the link to the course here in the chat. I think it's in the description of the video as well, but I'm going to go ahead and pop it in the chat there. So please join us, sign up. It's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, like Dr. Lim said earlier, there is lifetime access. So if you get behind, you can't keep up with all the reading, it's no problem. You still get to show up to the Q&As anyway, and you can watch the lessons later on when you're able to catch up. So all right, well, thanks for your time. I really appreciate you coming and doing this. Thanks for everybody for coming to watch and for all your questions. This was really great discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. So and hope to see everyone in the course. Take care, guys.
Thanks, John. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, Ed.